One of my biggest phobias in giving a keynote address is that I'll be asked to speak before the main course. And that means that my time is limited because people get a bit antsy. Always reminded during cocktails of the story of the old Jew that you've heard about it many times, but it's worth repeating, who was going to be fed to the lions by the Roman gladiators. And everybody was sitting in the Colosseum and getting all excited about the little old Jew who was about to be eaten by the lion. And they let the lion out of the cage. He came running towards the Jew, and the Jew picked up the lion's ear and whispered something. And the lion went back to the cage. And the Roman Caesar said, well, the law is that if the lion doesn't eat you, you're free to go. But tell me, what is it that you told the lion? He said, well, I just said that speech is after the meal. During the past year, I tried to concentrate on mourning my firstborn, and I decided to study in depth the book of Job. There's a famous question that all the commentaries deal with. Try to explain what problem God had with Job. When you read the first chapter, you have a story of somebody who was perfect. He took care of his family. He brought sacrifices to God. He gave charity religiously. So what was it that God found in Job that he decided to test him with such hardship of losing everything? And in his commentary, Rabbi Soloveitchik offers the following explanation. Job gave charity religiously, but it was mechanical. When we're asked to do acts of kindness, what is demanded of us is that we identify with the recipient. We feel the pain of the recipient. We become one with the recipient. And one thing I could say about Wizo, and this is not my first event with your organization, the people that I meet, the warmth that I feel, the commitment that is obvious and clear from everybody who was at this podium this evening, is that you've learned the lessons of Job. That you feel, that you identify with, that you become one with the projects, the important projects that you sponsor. You're making a difference in people's lives as you take part in the miracle of the rebirth of the Jewish Commonwealth in our homeland. So, in recognition of your honoree, Rosita, Ruthie, Yvette, Deputy Counsel of Israel, Ayelet Black, respectfully, all members of the board, it's an honor for me to be here with you. And Hannah is not only your USA president, honorary president. Hannah and Simon are, for me, like brother and sister. And let me just correct one thing, Simon. It's not 3 generations. It's actually 4. Because I first met Neely and Fima. May you rest in peace. When I spoke here in Miami more than 35 years ago, it was a small group, maybe 50 people. I was just beginning my way in public life. And a beautiful couple came up to me at the end of the speech. They didn't ask a question, they just came up to me. And they said, "We're with you. And you've been with me for over 3.5 decades. And it's an honor to make mention of Fima Zichrono Livracha, Menuchato Eden, who began a shevet כל כך חשוב ונכבד בישראל. And yes, when you talk about identifying with and being one with, you know, ladies and gentlemen, till my last day on earth, I won't forget that every single day of the Shiva, the Falic family sat with us. They didn't come to pay a Shiva call. They came every day. Thank you for the love and care and affection that you've showered on me and my family, my children and my grandchildren. As soon as the Shiva was over, we of course went to the kever of Moshe, who's buried in Har Herzl. And I immediately, as soon as I could, I went across the street to Shaarei Tzedek to visit the soldiers who were wounded together with my son, particularly Elisha Medan, as Simon mentioned, lost both legs. You see, the story is that my son was the commander of the lead company that entered Gaza. He basically led the entire brigade of 551, which is commandos in reserve. And the reason he led, a brigade has about 25, it's a huge brigade. It's about 2,500 soldiers. It has 8 battalions, and each battalion has 3 companies, and they go in like a pyramid. And like the brigade commander told me, he took Leiter to be the commander of the lead company because of his experience, because of his knowledge, because of his courage, because of his fearlessness. When I went to see Elisha, he doesn't cover the stubs, It's an emotional experience just to be sitting next to him. And he was still quite wounded. And he talked about my son's bravery, talked about his fearlessness. He's older than my son. He was 45, 5 of his own kids. They all volunteered. They didn't have to go. And I thought about it afterwards. I wondered what kind of fearlessness my son had. Because I once had a conversation with Arik Sharon, one of Israel's greatest generals, war heroes. And we were sitting in a hotel room in Manhattan, and I was helping him, assisting, writing an article. And I asked him, I said, Arik, who are your soldiers who are fearless? And how do you define fearlessness? And he said, it's very interesting. I had two soldiers, well known, who were fearless. But there was a tremendous difference between the two of them. He said, Rafael Eitan, he never felt fear. Naturally, he would stick his head out of the personnel carrier with bullets flying. He just didn't feel fear. But he said that was very different than Meir Har-Zion, another legendary war hero. He said Meir Har-Zion felt fear, but he overcame his fear. So I wondered about my son. I said to myself, what kind of fearlessness was he? Was he Meir Har-Zion or more Rafael Eitan? So I asked his best friend, Yankele. Yankele went through Shaldag with him. And Yankele said, I don't know. We were on operations together outside the country. The countries you visit without a passport, where you send some of the bad people to meet their creator. So my son led many of those missions. And he actually extricated his soldiers from very difficult positions in places like where beepers go off and things like that. And Yankele said, I was with him on so many of these missions, and yeah, he was fearless. He maintained calm under the most difficult circumstances, but I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what kind of fearlessness he was. And then I remembered, this was gnawing at me, and then I remembered when he was a little boy in Hebron. And we lived up on the hill, this old neighborhood called Tel Rameda, which was Hebron Atika, the original Hebron. The time of the patriarchs and matriarchs, that was Hebron. Moshe was actually the first baby to be born in Hebron Atika, 1984, since we returned. And he was about 4.5, and he was in Gan, in the kindergarten, and we had a transit, like a GMC, that would chauffeur the children around, back and forth to the Gan. And very often when they went through this area called Kikar Shoter, the policeman's square, they would get stoned. They'd throw rocks at the vehicle. And one day I came home, and Moshe jumped on me. He's a beautiful little kid. And he said, Abba, today you'd be proud of me. I said, Moshe, darling, I'm proud of you every day. What happened today? He said, Abba, today coming home from Gan, they threw stones at the GMC. And Yoram, the driver, told all the Yiladim to lay down on the floor. Ani lo shachafti ala ritzpah. I didn't lay down on the floor. I said, Moshe, if the driver tells you to lay down, it's for your own safety. And those occasions when the children look up at you like you just don't understand? So my little 4.5-year-old looked up at me and said, Abba, with exasperation. If they see me lay down on the floor, they'll think that I'm afraid. Danilo, and I'm not afraid. So I figured that he was more like Meir Har-Zion. He felt fear, but he overcame fear. And a week and a half ago, I got my proof. You see, one of Moshe's soldiers was my son David, number 4. And when the explosion took my son's life, along with Yossi Hershkovitz, member of his team, father of 5, Matan Meir from the Golan Heights, who was a movie director, and Sergei Shmarkin, who was his radio operator, in Oleh Hadash from Russia, from Kiryat Shmona. David was only 25 meters away. And actually, when they knocked at the door and told me it was Moshe, and my heart missed a beat, I just wanted to hear that it was just Moshe and not David as well, because he was with him. And about 2 months after the Shiva, David contracted a rather serious illness. Thank God he's doing very well. But he has PTSD. And his counselor suggested that he go to the Far East for a while to relax. So he was in Thailand for like a month and a half on an island. And I missed him. And I also wanted to make sure he was doing okay. So I flew there to be with him for a few days, got his permission. And it was the most therapeutic 5 days I've had the past year. We sat there, small moon on the beach at night, and he told me, and solved my dilemma. He told me that as they were about to enter Gaza, after 3 weeks of preparation, and again, Moshe is the lead company, and the way it works is that the army uses artillery before they actually go in on foot. And the artillery is shot over their heads into Gaza to prepare the area to keep the Hamas terrorists hiding. So you actually hear the whiz of the artillery and the earth shakes. You can't imagine the amount of noise it makes, how frightening it is. And David said, I went up to Moshe, his older brother, who was his commander. He said, Moshe, ani mefached. I'm afraid. And Moshe gave him a hug and said, Gam ani, aval David, Bonei lech latzil et chatufim. Bonei lech biyachad. He said, me too. But let's go together and free those hostages. So I got my answer. Moshe felt fear. It's natural to feel fear. It's interesting. Ruthie made mention of Elul, the month of Elul, the month leading up to the days of judgment. And every day, we say twice Psalm 27, which talks about fear, overcoming fear. Very interesting. The David, by David, King David. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Whom shall I dread? When you know the Lord is your salvation, you can overcome fear. And why particularly before Rosh Hashanah, before the days of judgment? That's what I want to share with you this evening. What I really have to say takes a few hours. Fear not. I'll just take a few minutes more. But it's so important, I believe. And I've got my son Moshe, blowing at my ear and saying to me, Abba, don't let them off cheaply. Because we are at war. This is a pivotal time in Jewish history. And I need to share this with you. I need you to understand this. The Jewish people, Jewish history, Jewish providence need you to understand this. We are not only in a war of survival, of physical survival. Hamas didn't only attack the physical existence of the Jewish state and kill people physically. This is a war of ideas. And to fight a war of ideas, you need no less courage than to fight a war with artillery, with guns, and with airplanes and explosions. I don't like quoting Lenin, but he said something very smart. Maybe the only thing he said that was smart. He said there are decades where nothing happens. And then there are weeks where decades happen. There's different cadence in history. Sometimes history is slow. We had decades of relative quiet that were relatively the same. That's changed. We are now in weeks and months where decades are moving forward, where things are happening so fast and they're so dramatic. We have to have the courage to be fearless and keep up with that change. Do you ask yourself the question when we look back and we say, how could Jews not see 1938? How could they stay? How could it have happened? How could they have been so blind? People don't like change. Change is very difficult. To perceive the need to change one's standing, to change one's ideas, to change one's position in life is perhaps the most trying event that a person can experience. So we don't want to accept the fact that people want our extinction, because that moves us out of our ideological comfort zone. So we explain it away. And we say, well, there's an argument over territory. They have their position, we have our position. You ask yourselves a question. How could it be, after 11 months, with tens of thousands of attacks on our civilians, that today, within minutes, after the events in Lebanon, the BBC and the New York Times and CNN and Axios and AP, everybody said that it's an Israeli provocation? How could it be? How could it be that on October 8th, before Israel retaliated, you already had people in the streets, not of Moscow, but of your cities, in your universities, where ideas are manufactured. Professors in universities glorifying the slaughter of innocents. How could it be? Ideas have consequences. I'm fascinated by the industry of Holocaust. How much money has been invested in the Holocaust? Billions and billions of dollars. We have Holocaust museums, and we have Holocaust courses, and we have Holocaust trips. We have Holocaust shtuck in this year and that year. We have Holocaust coming out of our senses. And what? The most important lesson of the Holocaust we ignore. You know what that lesson is, ladies and gentlemen? It's one simple lesson. It's the first commandment of Jewish existence. When somebody says, I want you dead, believe them. And after all of that expense and all of that effort, so many of us refuse to understand that. What we have to understand, what we have to muster up the courage, the fearlessness of these days of Elul, And after all, what is it that Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur demand of us? Soul searching. Change. That's why King David says, escape fear, overcome fear. Be like Moshe, overcome fear. Because you can't change your perspective if you don't overcome fear. So, if you look at the political science journals for the past 20 years, there's an attempt to figure out what paradigm now exists in the world. You know, in international relations, we speak in terms of paradigms. So the paradigm for most of our lives is pretty simple. The paradigm was a bipolar world, right? Until 1991. It was the United States and the West against the Soviet Union and the East. It was a bipolar world. And then along came the breakup of the Soviet Union. By the way, I got to tell you, in parentheses, there's a big argument about why the Soviet Union broke up. And you've got the economists who say it was because the economy exploded, and you've got the nationalists who say it was because of the nationalisms of the members of the Soviet Union. And you've got those who explain it was Star Wars of Ronald Reagan. You know what the truth is? The truth is that the Soviet Union exploded because of a lady, a Jewish lady, by the name of Avital Sharansky, who went around the whole world with her smile, the bravery of the Jewish woman that you spoke about earlier, and brought to the fore in front of the leaders of the world. This little Jewish lady goes around to the world and says, let my people go. She musters up all the history of the Jewish people and she carries it on her shoulders and she sits down with presidents and prime ministers and bangs on the table. She changes fearlessly reality. So in front of all the leaders of the world, she stuck that economy and that nationalism and Star Wars in front of them. That alone wouldn't have helped. But the refuseniks, the Jews, brought down the Soviet Union, led by Avital and Natan and their friends. So now, what was the new paradigm? Soviet Union exploded, imploded. What was the new paradigm to be? So if you went to university in the 1990s, you had to read a book. The book became the Bible of the West. It was the last man and the end of history. The end of history. And the argument was now that everybody would adopt democracy. Everybody's marching towards democracy. It's funny how determinism, political determinism, is a Marxist idea. But all of a sudden it became a democratic idea. Right? Everybody's marching towards democracy. Once people taste democracy, they won't want to step back. But friends, democracy doesn't give meaning to life. Democracy is a system of government. Nobody wakes up in the morning and breathes democracy. Democracy is a system. It's not meaning. So what happened as America marched into the future thinking that everybody would become democratic? What happened? Russian fascism developed and said, hey, we're a czarist nation. We have a glorious history. We don't believe in democracy. Democracy is nonsense. Why do we give the drunk and the intellect the same vote? Yes. Read his books. His name is Alexander Dugin. He's a philosopher sitting next to Putin, architecting Putin's policies. Another ism came to be. We thought China would move to a free economy. They become democratic. No. They became a harsh autocracy with intent of conquering as much as possible of the world. Their navy is now larger than the U.S. Navy. And without, you'll tell me we still have the destroyers. Yeah, okay. The aircraft carriers. Yes, we have more aircraft carriers. But pound to pound, they have a larger navy. And if you don't control the seas, You don't control the economy. 95% of the world economy is based on sea trade. You know how many ships traverse the oceans every day? About 55,000 ships on the oceans every day. We know what the Houthis did now in the Suez Canal. Changed the whole shipping industry. What happens if tomorrow the Spratly Islands are taken over by China? Which they're threatening to do every day. Everybody's looking at Taiwan. But if the Strait of Malacca is taken over by China, world economy tanks. What happens if Venezuela, with the support of Iran, starts lobbing some sort of artillery in the direction of the Panama Canal, just to confuse things a little bit? What if they invade Guyana, which they're threatening to do? What does that do? That ism is not democracy. And we get to the third ism, radical Islam. You know who wants us to defeat Hamas more than anybody else in the world? Saudi Arabia. Not all of Saudi Arabia. The moderates. Those who want to partner with the West. There's no one more afraid of Hamas winning, of Hamas being left standing. In Islam, there is a battle between moderates and radical Islam. So we have a new axis that's formed. We're in a new Cold War, ladies and gentlemen. The Cold War is not about to happen. The Cold War is already in place. Let me bring the bearer of those news to you. We are in a Cold War. It's not the Cold War of the 20th century, because there isn't one Soviet Union and one United States of America. It's three isms that have created this axis: Russian fascism, Chinese communism, and radical Islamism. And they are divided amongst themselves. But what unites them is one thing: the hatred of the West and the intent to destroy the United States of America. The way to destroy the United States of America is to destroy Israel. Because Israel is there. It's there in the Middle East. It's the toehold of Western civilization. It's the beginning of Western civilization, and it's the toehold of Western civilization. That's the first change. And the second change, and with this I'll leave you. The second change is more threatening than the first. When there was a Cold War I, there was a bipolar world then, the United States of America knew who it was. I went to school in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I pledged allegiance to the flag. And I sang the national anthem. And I studied Jefferson and Madison. I took them very seriously, as did everyone in my family and all of my friends. America today, ladies and gentlemen, the first thing, the most elemental thing that a human being can do, must do, to be human, is to discern. The ability to discern. That's what God does when He creates the world. He discerns heaven and earth, water and land, animals from plant life, human beings from animals, Shabbat from other days of the week. And He tells Adam and Eve, you have to discern too between the trees in the garden. And if you stop discerning, you get kicked out of the Garden of Eden. What's the first thing we do when we conclude our Shabbat? We discern. Hamavdil ben kodesh lechol, ben or lechoshech, ben Yisrael la'amim. We are people who discern. That's what makes us human. That's what makes us divinely human. A country that could not discern between man and woman cannot discern between Hamas and Israel. Sorry. There aren't 58 genders. God created a world. He's the arbiter. He's the architect. And the moment we forgot that, everything goes. Every 5 minutes in this country, somebody dies from an overdose. Every 20 minutes, someone commits suicide. Every 25 minutes, somebody's murdered. Abortion on demand, assisted suicides. Every year in Canada, assisted suicides goes up by 2,500 people. This past year was up to 13,500. All you got to do is say, I don't want to live anymore. There was a poll in Great Britain just 2 months ago, 18-year-olds to 29-year-olds. 85% said there's no meaning to life. There's no meaning to life. And you know what the greatest proof of that is? Right here in your backyard. You have no future. You know why? Because you have no children. There are 36 countries in the OECD, the developed nations of the world. There is one country with replacement fertility in the OECD. I had the honor of participating in preparing Israel's material for entrance into the OECD when I was in the finance ministry with Bibi in 2004, 2005. And we entered the OECD. The only country in the world with replacement fertility is Israel. So when somebody tells you they're not sure about Israel, is it really a miracle? Tell me something, is that not a miracle? 3 generations after a Holocaust? Pinch yourselves, look yourselves in the mirror, give yourself a patch. 3 generations after a Holocaust, the only country in the world with replacement fertility is the Jewish state. That's who you're supporting. That's who you have to support. That's the message. That's the idea. That's what we're projecting to the world. Life has meaning. We're a people of discernment. My son wasn't killed just protecting the son of Israel, the safety of Israel. He's protecting the idea that began with Avraham Avinu, the beginning of our history. When Hashem said to Avraham, Lech Lecha, go forth. That's the beginning of Jewish history. Isn't it amazing? Lech Lecha is the beginning of Jewish history. When we are Lech Lecha, we follow the footsteps of Abraham. When we trod in place, where we're not willing to move forward, we're not willing to change, when we're not willing to be fearless, we suffer the consequences. This is a war that is not going to end soon. It is a war of ideas. It's a war for our survival, but it's a war for civilization. That's our job. It's not a private affair. Avraham Avinu is the father of our nation, but he's also Av Hamon Goyim, the father of many nations. It is for us to teach the world. And we're setting an example. When my son marched into Gaza together with his colleagues, together with his comrades, when the IDF will march tomorrow into Lebanon, we're marching to protect and defend civilization against the isms that deny the individual, the human being who's created in the image of God. Even if we don't know it and we're not conscious of it, and even if the world rejects us and calls us provocateurs, even if they don't get it, not everybody got it when Abraham said, it's not us who create God, it's God who created us. It was a revolutionary idea, and he changed the world forever. We are his children, and we are changing the world forever. We can choose to discern, We can choose to be fearless. We can choose to be part of writing that history, of being proactively his children. My son was given the order to find the tunnel shaft from which Hamas was shooting missiles into Ashkelon. It was a Friday afternoon when he got the order. He had been through 2 weeks of battle, successful battle. He had 13 injuries, no fatalities. His company killed many Hamas terrorists. And the intelligence data said there's a shaft in the mosque in the Sivivon neighborhood of Beit Hanun. You must find the shaft and destroy it. So at 2 o'clock he moved. At 1:30, he spoke on his encrypted phone to Yankala. Remember Yankala, who I asked about fear? And Yankala told me, he says, your son he was walking on water. He was in the cloud. He said, I understand what we're doing here. He was so confident and so fearless. And it was just before Parshat Chayei Sarah, the Parsha in the Torah where Abraham buys the cave of the patriarchs to bury Sarah. Abraham was looking for a cave and Moshe was looking for a tunnel. And after they went through the mosque and didn't find it, he sent the dog from Oketz, the unit of sniffing dogs, to the alleyways around the mosque. And the dog sat down 3 times in a place where Moshe knew that wasn't correct. Apparently it was part of the trap. So he began to enter the houses around the mosque in house-to-house battle formation, house-to-house combat formation. They scoured the first house and they went into the second house. And in the inner room, the children's bedroom, he found the shaft, and he went into the room with Yossi and Matan and Sergei. Beyond the wall, in the hallway, were 6 of his other soldiers. And he found the shaft. And it exploded. It was a massive explosion that blew out their lower torso and brought the ceiling and the walls down on the top of them. And everybody that was on the other side of the wall lost their legs. Moshe's last words on his radio were, Matzano et apir, we found the shaft. Shabbat shalom. And as soon as he said shalom, the explosion went off because the terrorists were in the tunnel and they had followed him with a hidden camera. Ladies and gentlemen, we're looking for the tunnel. We're looking for the shaft, the collective tunnel, that will lead us in proper time to a Shabbat Shalom. And it's a Shabbat Shalom not only for the state of Israel, but for the entire world. Muster up the strength. Be fearless. Be not afraid. Read Psalm 27 with confidence and enter the days of judgment with added sense of purpose, of meaning. Find more ways to be kind and loving and appreciative of the lives that we've been given as the Jewish people. Because the world is waiting for us, whether they know it or not. They're waiting for a Shabbat Shalom. So let's try and give it to them. Thank you very much.